Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. Labor Department inflation report for June, prices up 9.1% year over year, largest rise since 1981. Biden administration calling it out of date, though, because of falling gasoline prices lately. But Republicans blaming Democrats' policies, and now there's increased debate over a spending and tax package being put together by the Democrats, the latest version of what's been called the Build Back Better plan. President Biden starts his trip to the Middle East. First stop is Israel. There he says that he continues to support a two-state solution when it comes to the Palestinians, but he knows a solution is not in the near term. The president will later be going on to Saudi Arabia. We will talk with a cyberspace reporter about U.S. concerns that both Israel and Saudi Arabia have been using spyware against journalists and dissidents, raising human rights issues. Back in the U.S., House and Senate committees holding a series of hearings on abortion access and the law after the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And the first statue of an African-American woman in National Statuary Hall collection unveiled today in the U.S. Capitol. It's Mary McLeod Bethune, educator and civil rights activist representing Florida. And in Great Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson holds his first Prime Minister's question since announcing his resignation as Prime Minister and Conservative Party leader, pending the selection of a replacement. He says he leaves office with his head held high at what's been accomplished. A story at CNBC.com, shoppers paid sharply higher prices for a variety of goods in June as inflation kept its hold on a slowing U.S. economy, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported Wednesday. The Consumer Price Index, a broad measure of everyday goods and services related to the cost of living, soared 9.1% from a year ago, above the 8.8% that Dow Jones estimated. That marked the fastest pace of inflation going back to November 1981. President Biden putting out a written statement about this that begins, while today's headline inflation reading is unacceptably high, it is also out of date. Energy alone comprised nearly half of the monthly increase in inflation. Today's data does not reflect the full impact of nearly 30 days of decreases in gas prices that have reduced the price of the pump by about 40 cents since mid-June. That statement from President Biden. Vice President Kamala Harris also focusing on that point.
Before I begin, I will address this month's CPI report. There is no question that we still have work to do, but it is important to note that these numbers do not fully reflect the recent drop in gas prices. Average national gas prices have fallen every day for nearly 30 days. Since mid-June, prices are down 40 cents a gallon. Fighting inflation is one of our administration's top economic priorities, which is why we have taken action to lower the cost of living for Americans, millions of Americans. We are releasing 1 million barrels of oil a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to lower prices at the pump. We have reduced high-speed internet bills for millions of Americans. And we passed a tax cut to give working families up to $8,000 a year, which means giving folks more room in their budgets to buy food, medication, and school supplies for their children. President Joe Biden and I are always fighting to make sure that working families can get ahead and stay ahead. And that is why we continue to call on Congress to pass legislation to lower the price of prescription drugs, of health care, and the other everyday essentials that will meet the needs of American families.
Vice President Kamala Harris today in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, part of the White House complex. Start of remarks that also announced $40 billion from last year's coronavirus economic relief law, known as the American Rescue Plan, for workplace development. On Capitol Hill, this from Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the minority whip.
Inflation numbers came out this morning, and once again, they were not good. Inflation in June was 9.1%. 9.1%, the highest level since November of 1981. Groceries are up 12% on average. Baby food is up 14%. Milk, up 16%. Chicken is up 18%. And the list goes on. Household cleaning products are up 11%. Gas prices are up nearly 60%. Furniture and bedding are up 13%. Utility gas service is up 38%. Health insurance is up 17%. And on and on and on. Mr. President, everywhere Americans look, they're facing price increases. Price increases on the most essential items: groceries, gas, their utility bills. And on top of all this, real average hourly earnings are currently declining at the fastest pace in 40 years. 58% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Price increases on the most essential items: groceries, gas, their utility bills. All these things, Mr. President, are forcing Americans to dig into their savings when they have them to try and make ends meet. Others relying on things like credit cards or visits to food banks. Demand for food assistance has soared in recent months. One organization in my hometown in South Dakota received 600 more calls for food assistance in May of this year than it had received in the same month a year ago. And food banks often have fewer resources to meet the need, thanks to declines in donations and the high price of groceries. And, Mr. President, there is no end to this pain in sight. A recent Joint Economic Committee analysis found that inflation will cost the average household $7,620 over the next year, or $635 per month. $635 per month. That's an unsustainable burden for working families.
The Senate Minority Whip John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor. Back to President Biden's statement about the inflation report. He also laid out steps that he says he's taking to try to reduce inflation and cost to families. It includes, quote, "I will urge Congress to act this month on legislation to reduce the cost of everyday expenses that are hitting American families, from prescription drugs to utility bills to health insurance premiums, to make more in America." That effort, combined with perhaps climate change and an energy component, has been under negotiation among Democrats to pass through a budget process known as reconciliation that Republicans cannot filibuster. Back to Senator John Thune on the floor. He opposes this effort, specifically a part that would increase taxes on some.
Despite the fact that our inflation crisis is even worse now than it was last fall, Democrats are once again considering a version of their Build Back Better tax and spending spree. We don't know all the details yet, but what we do know is cause for alarm. Democrats are planning to raise taxes by $1 trillion. $1 trillion. And a substantial part of that tax increase would come in the form of new taxes on small businesses. That's right, on small, individually and family-owned businesses, or what are often called pass-through businesses. In other words, Mr. President, Main Street America, the businesses that create jobs.
Senator John Thune on the Senate floor. Over on the House side of the U.S. Capitol, the Democratic caucus chair, Hakeem Jeffries of New York, at a news conference asked by reporters today about the inflation report and this proposed social spending and tax package being finalized, latest version of what's been known as Build Back Better.
Question on inflation. It's reached 9.1% in the new report out today. Republicans are saying this is not the time for Democrats to do another $500 billion spending bill. What's your defense of this effort to now do another slimmed-down version of the Build Back Better?
Well, we'll see what happens in the Senate in terms of the particulars, and I open it up to any members behind me to comment. But I think, as Mikey Sherrill indicated, and I'll yield to Mikey and Pete, our focus really is to make America as affordable as it can be for American families and everyday Americans. And we've taken legislative step after legislative step to do that, whether that's on gas prices, which, by the way, are coming down, on food prices, whether that's on driving down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs. So it's my hope that whatever comes out of the Senate is focused on lowering costs for everyday Americans, consistent with what we've done in the House.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the caucus chair at a news conference with other Democratic members. He mentioned Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey, also Pete Aguilar of California, the caucus vice chair. The Hill newspaper reports that centrist Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, on Wednesday pumped the brakes on negotiations with the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer over a budget reconciliation bill, warning that it needs to be scrubbed much better after a new report showed that inflation hit 9.1% in June. Manchin told reporters he's not sure if he can agree to anything beyond the prescription drug reform component of the bill, which has already been sent to the Senate Parliamentarian's office and has the support of 50 members of the Democratic caucus. That from thehill.com. Wall Street today, the Dow down 208, NASDAQ and S&P both down 17. USN today confirmed Michael Barr to be a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The vote was 66 to 28. Barr is currently dean of the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, chair of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, spoke on the Senate floor before the vote.
Mr. Barr is a qualified nominee who came out of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee with strong bipartisan support. 5 Republicans, including Ranking Member Toomey, and all 12 Democrats supported his nomination. It's clear why. He's a leading expert with decades of experience helping to guide and protect our economy, including experience with financial institutions and financial regulations. He's served this country at the Departments of Treasury and State, as well as at the White House. At the Treasury Department as Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions, Mr. Barr played a critical role in responding to the 2008 financial crisis when Wall Street greed and recklessness crashed our economy. And I know, especially as I've said on the floor, what it did to my community, even my neighborhood, the zip code in which Connie and I live in Cleveland, 44105, had more foreclosures in the first half of 2007 than any zip code in America. And we still live with that. We passed Dodd-Frank, Wall Street Reform Act back then. Among many steps the legislation took to prevent another crisis, we created the vice chair for supervision to identify and to stay ahead of risks to our country's financial system, cyber threats, volatile cryptocurrency, the climate crisis. We created this job to hold the biggest banks accountable so that Wall Street doesn't put working families and businesses on Main Street at risk. Again, we know Wall Street puts its own interest first always. We know too often it's at the risk of small businesses and the risks of working families and the risks of middle class and the risks of low-income people. We understand that's their behavior. The purpose of Dodd-Frank was as far as we could go to fix that. Mr. Barr's worked for a quarter century to make our financial system safer and fairer. He's focused on developing and evaluating financial regulatory policies. Most importantly, Madam President, he has a keen understanding of the type of risks that pose threats to our financial stability.
Senator Sherrod Brown on the Senate floor. Again, the Senate went on to confirm Michael Barr to the Fed board, 66 to 28. 27 Republicans in the Senate, including the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and the Banking Committee Ranking Member Pat Toomey, joining all Democrats in voting to confirm. And the Senate later also voting to make Michael Barr Fed Vice Chair for supervision. The next Federal Reserve meeting, during which interest rates are expected to go up again, another 0.5 or 0.75 of a percentage point, we're told, is July 26th and 27th. Today, Reuters reports that the Bank of Canada raised its main interest rate by 100 basis points, that's a full percentage point, in a bid to crush inflation, surprising markets and becoming the first G7 country to make such an aggressive hike in this economic cycle. The busy summer travel season, a point of discussion at today's Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee hearing with the head of the TSA, Transportation Security Administration, David Pekoski. He has been renominated by President Biden for a second 5-year term. Here's Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, asking about staffing challenges.
You talked about and have said that the agency expects this summer to be very, very busy. I mentioned the numbers. We're already seeing that. Talk about some of your biggest workforce issues. How do you think we could resolve them?
Yes, ma'am. It's been a busy summer. Pretty much every day since Memorial Day has been a 2 million plus travel day. You mentioned that the busiest day was the Friday before the 4th of July weekend. Broke all the records until before the pandemic. So it's been very, very busy. Our workforce has performed incredibly during the spring break, and certainly as we're about in the midpoint in the summer. One of the biggest things for us, and I mentioned it in my opening statement, is to ensure that we do achieve pay equity. I mean, when you look at all those men and women that are on the front lines of TSA, they're generally making about 30% less than their federal counterparts in other agencies. If we classified their positions using standard guidelines, their pay would increase by 30%. That's significant, and that's something that I think is absolutely critical for TSA in the future, and I would appreciate your support of that pay equity initiative. The other thing that is very important to keep in mind is that everyone in the country pretty much has had a difficult time hiring entry-level people. It's not easy. It's much harder than it's ever been since I've been the administrator. We are about 10% below where we'd like to be with our screening workforce, but we've been able to maintain our wait time standards because of the incredible work of that workforce and some management flexibilities that we have. I mean, we asked for volunteers amongst all the transportation security officers and said, hey, if you'd like to volunteer, if you're at an airport that might be overstaffed, we'd like to move you to another airport that would be understaffed. We had 1,000 people raise their hands and do that, and that's one of the reasons why we've been able to maintain our standards through this busy summer to date.
The TSA Administrator David Pekoske. Questions by Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota. Today's confirmation hearing. Pekoske up for a second 5-year term. Ellen Gilmer, Homeland Security reporter for Bloomberg Government, tweeting, Pekoske managed to get through his first term relatively unscathed, setting up a smooth confirmation process for his second term, barring any surprises. In Israel, President Joe Biden touching down at the airport in Tel Aviv. His first trip to the Middle East as president. He'll spend a few days in Israel, then head to Saudi Arabia. CNN reports that President Biden is doing something he has never done on a foreign trip, embracing one of his predecessor's legacy achievements. While much of his foreign travel in his first 18 months in office has focused on reversing the foreign policy of former President Donald Trump and shoring up battered alliances, Biden on his first trip to the Middle East will embrace the Trump-era Abraham Accords that normalize relations between Israel and several Arab countries and pursue an expansion of growing Arab-Israeli security and economic ties. That from CNN. President Biden welcomed at the airport by the Prime Minister, Yair Lapid.
Mr. President, this is both a historic visit and a deeply personal one. It is historic because it expresses the unbreakable bond between our countries, our commitment to shared values, democracy, freedom, and the right of the Jewish people to a state of their own. And it is a very personal visit because your relationship with Israel has always been very personal. You once defined yourself as a Zionist. You said that you don't have to be a Jew in order to be a Zionist. And you were right. And in your case, a great Zionist and one of the best friends Israel has ever known. You have not been here for a few years, so in the next couple of days, you will see how Israel has grown and developed. You will see the strength and smartness of the Israeli army, the creativity of the startup nation, the diversity of the Israeli society. Israel is a country that brings together the past, the present, and the future. Just moments ago, your plane, Air Force One, flew over where King Saul searched for his father's donkeys, above King David's rooftop, above the palm tree that Deborah, the prophet, sat under. You also flew over a world-leading high-tech industry, over agriculture that is helping improve food security around the globe, above universities and research institutes where Israeli scientists, including Nobel Prize winners, are leading groundbreaking research. During your visit, we will discuss matters of national security. We will discuss building a new security and economy architecture with the nations of the Middle East following the Abraham Accords and the achievements of the Negev Summit. And we will discuss the need to renew a strong global coalition that will stop the Iranian nuclear program.
The Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid at the welcoming ceremony at the airport in Israel. President Joe Biden, in his remarks, also emphasizing close U.S. ties with Israel and laying out the agenda for his visit.
I'm proud to say that our relationship with the State of Israel is deeper and stronger, in my view, than it's ever been. And with this visit, we're strengthening our connections even further. We have reaffirmed the unshakable commitment of the United States to Israel's security, including partnering with Israel on the most cutting-edge defense systems in the world. From here, I'm going straight to a briefing on Israeli missiles and rocket defense capabilities, including the U.S. support for the Iron Dome and Israel's new laser-enabled system called the Iron Beam. We're going to deepen our connections in science and innovation and work to address global challenges through the new strategic high-level dialogue on technology. We'll continue to advance Israel's integration into the region, expand emerging forums and engagement like the new I2U2 summit, which will bring Israel, the United States, the UAE together, and India as well, to deepen our economic cooperation between the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific. Greater peace, greater stability, greater connection. It's critical. It's critical, if I might add, for all the people of the region, which is why we'll discuss my continued support, even though I know it's not in the near term, a two-state solution. That remains, in my view, the best way to ensure the future of equal measure of freedom, prosperity, and democracy for Israelis and Palestinians alike. We're going to celebrate the ending of people-to-people connection and the enduring connection that binds our nations together, commemorate the history that we must never allow to repeat itself. Later today, I will once more return to the hallowed ground of Yad Vashem to honor 6 million Jewish lives were stolen in the genocide and continue, which we must do every day, continue to bear witness. To keep alive the truth and honor of the Holocaust, horror of the Holocaust, honor those we lost so that we never, ever forget that lesson.
President Biden arriving in Tel Aviv, Israel. An article at Politico begins, President Joe Biden faces a tricky decision as he travels to Israel and Saudi Arabia this week. Confront these nations' sponsorship and use of spyware or ignore it for the sake of diplomacy. Joining us now on the phone is the author of that article, Politico's cyberspace reporter, Maggie Miller. Thanks for being with us. What is this all about?
Well, thank you for having me. Spyware as an issue is one that has become increasingly thorny and difficult in recent years, and a lot of it really revolves around one Israeli company called NSO Group, which produces a type of software that's called Pegasus. And now Pegasus has been found by various human rights groups, researchers, even the United Nations, to be used on different devices of people that are often deemed by governments to be threats. And when I say governments, often more hardline governments, I would say. So these can include journalists, human rights defenders, government dissidents. Also could include targeting other governments that they might see as threats. And basically the issue with this particular type of spyware is that it can be installed on somebody's phone without them knowing. It's not the type of cyber threat that, you get maybe a kind of strange-looking link for and you click on it. It can be what's called a zero-click vulnerability, which means it can be installed in other ways where the user doesn't click on anything, doesn't make a mistake. It's a very expensive type of product. Governments will spend millions of dollars to purchase this. Very secretively used because once it's on a device, it can, surveil in many ways, follow the location, but also steal data, listen into calls, turn on videos, turn on different photographs. And of course, the proponents of it, such as NSO Group, but also maybe quieter companies that we're not as well known, might say, okay, but it's been used to help in cases to foil terrorist attacks. The use of Pegasus has been linked to catching El Chapo in Mexico several years ago. Unfortunately, though, it can also be misused for, as I mentioned, governments to use it against those that are not doing necessarily anything wrong, but might be deemed to be doing something wrong by that government. So it's become a very, very thorny issue, particularly given it's been used increasingly against different governments. Earlier this year, several Spanish politicians found this type of spyware on their phones. So it's one that's becoming more difficult to ignore.
You also give two examples that people might be familiar with, Jeff Bezos and Jamal Khashoggi.
Absolutely. So during President Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia later in this week, he'll be meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who U.S. intelligence earlier on have attributed as being personally responsible for the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi and the very brutal killing of him. And, of course, in afterwards, there were findings that Pegasus, this type of spyware, was found on the phones of some of his very close associates, those who were around him. It was also the United Nations researchers for them, experts for them, concluded that it had been put on the phone of Jeff Bezos, who, of course, is the former Amazon CEO, but also the owner of the Washington Post, where Jamal Khashoggi had worked. And it's been very concerning that this is obviously, as many have pointed out, a potential human rights issue, given that these subjects have no idea that this is on their phone. It's a major invasion of privacy. But it is an issue around the overall murder case that is very pertinent. And, President Biden's already facing a lot of pushback for visiting Saudi Arabia, and this is one aspect of that.
We're talking with Politico reporter Maggie Miller. So the issue is out there. What is the White House and the Israeli government, maybe the Saudi Arabian government, are they saying anything about this? Also, you've got some reaction from prominent members of Congress.
Yeah, so the Saudi Arabian government has been a little more tight-lipped on this. The Israeli government, in terms of this trip as well, however, they have taken steps, given that NSO Group is a major export for their company. They've taken steps to kind of put limits on it, given that now if NSO Group signs a contract with another government and their clients are only governments, it has to be approved by the Israeli Ministry of Defense before that can go through. So that is something that is often cited by the company as, a check and balance for it. But it's obviously not enough in that, countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, to name a few, are receiving this spyware and using it for less honest reasons, or the recent issue with the spyware on the phones of Spanish politicians. When I say Spanish politicians, I mean those based in Catalonia, which and many think it may be linked to the Spanish government putting that on their phones. So there is a lot of pushback over the use of this spyware, and the Biden administration is very aware of this. So they've taken several steps already, including last year NSO Group and a few other well-known spyware groups were placed on the Commerce Department's entity list, which is a list of companies that are effectively blacklisted from doing business in the U.S. This has definitely prompted pushback from the Israeli government, given that this is a major company for them. And I was told by a White House spokesperson that more is coming down the pipeline. The National Security Council is working on a rule to ban U.S. government agencies from purchasing or using any foreign spyware that could pose a security risk for the U.S. government. And that's interesting, given that the FBI has used this, or at least they've purchased NSO Group spyware before, at least for testing. So that will be banned. So the Biden administration is very aware of it, and they can certainly take steps within the U.S. borders. But it is a very different story when it comes to diplomatic relations.
And the members of Congress.
Yes. So this is also something that members of Congress are very interested in and very focused on, especially, as I noted, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. I spoke with the chairman, Mark Warner of Virginia, and the vice chairman, Marco Rubio of Florida, who both noted, their concerns about spyware, but they also were cautioning that the issue of pushing back against this on the international stage is that, at least in Saudi Arabia, it could make it awkward, given that President Biden is there in many ways to try to help with the energy crisis here in the U.S. And in Israel, he's really trying to push for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and trying to bring up something that is very contentious with both countries. It could make for a rather awkward situation. And both of those senators, acknowledged that. But another senator, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, a Democrat of Oregon, who's also on the Intelligence Committee, told me that he really hoped that President Biden would send, quote, a strong message to mercenary hackers and authoritarians that America will punish anyone who uses technology to undermine our national security or to target journalists and dissidents, end quote. And so there is clearly concern about it, but definitely not really consensus on how to sort of walk that delicate line between standing up to the misuse and really trying to further our diplomatic efforts.
Maggie Miller is a cyberspace reporter with Politico. Find her story at Politico.com. And on Twitter, she's at MagMill95. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Washington Today continues in a moment.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We tape it right here in the C-SPAN studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In the town where extremes get all the attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history. From what's new and happening right now, relive the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN podcast, The Weekly. Find it wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. 5 House and Senate committees are holding hearings this week and into next about the Supreme Court's recent decision on abortion, the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, putting the issue in the hands of individual states. An article at rollcall.com has this: by scheduling a series of hearings on the Supreme Court decision, Democrats hope to signal they are looking for ways to protect abortion access, but legal and procedural constraints have limited what can be accomplished. C-SPAN is covering these hearings. Today there was one before the House Oversight and Reform Committee. The chair is Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, Democrat from New York. Here's a bit of it as she asks witness Georgia State Representative Renita Shannon, also Democrat, what's coming in Georgia.
For years, right-wing lawmakers across the country have been pushing so-called trigger bans that are designed to ban abortion immediately if Roe fell. Now that the Supreme Court has thrown out the constitutional right to abortion in 16 states have banned or nearly banned abortions, and many more will follow. And we have a map here that shows where abortion is banned, will soon be banned, or is being seriously considered. Almost half of the states. These bans are stripping away the rights for millions of Americans across our country. Representative Shannon, I understand that any day now Georgia may implement a 6-week ban on abortion. What would the impact be on the people you represent?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. As I mentioned in my testimony, yes, most of Georgia does not have the resources that the Atlanta metro area has, and Georgia ranks high consistently for maternal mortality deaths. And so if abortion were outlawed, simply put, we would be outlawing access to care. Which is something that would only exacerbate maternal mortality. So this would be a tremendous issue for the majority of the state. I've mentioned before how low our wages are in the state, and many places have really become unaffordable. And so this would be a tremendous burden and would amount to structural violence for many communities around the state.
Georgia State Representative Renita Shannon testifying before the U.S. House Oversight and Reform Committee. Questions from the chair, Democrat Carolyn Maloney. A senior Republican on the committee is Virginia Fox of North Carolina. This is what she asked another witness, Erin Morrow Hawley from the Alliance Defending Freedom organization.
Ms. Hawley, in recent years, pro-choice advocates have shifted their agenda by stating that abortion is a necessary component of health care, which is what we just heard. Would you consider taking the life of an unborn baby? health care?
Absolutely not. Abortion is not health care. And in fact, if we look at the statistics from women who have had abortions themselves, 75% of those women say they would have chosen life if circumstances would have been different. Abortion is not health care.
So in your opinion, is the Dobbs ruling an attack on women's rights? And did women ever have a constitutional right to take the life of their unborn baby?
The Supreme Court opinion, Dobbs, cogently explained that there is nothing in the Constitution's text or structure or in our nation's history that would in any sense support a right to an abortion. If you look at our nation's history, abortion has been unlawful since the common law. In 1973, when Roe v. Wade was decided, that case overturned the pro-life laws of nearly every single state.
Erin Morrow Hawley, Alliance Defending Freedom Senior Counsel, questioned by Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, ranked Republican on the House Oversight and Reform Committee, holding a hearing today, one of several hearings by House and Senate committees, all currently chaired by Democrats, about the Supreme Court's abortion decision. U.S. House also this week expected to vote on 2 abortion-related bills. The news story in Roll Call describes them as one would broadly expand the right to receive and perform an abortion, and another travel bill that would protect interstate travel to seek an abortion where the procedure is legal. The Bethune-Cookman University Concert Chorale in Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol building today, as a statue of Mary McLeod Bethune was unveiled. She will become the first Black American in the National Statuary Hall collection. Washington Post writes that Bethune was a civil rights activist, a presidential advisor, and the founder of the Daytona Literary and Industrial Training School for Negro Girls, which became Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach. Her statue will represent the state of Florida. Among the speakers today, many from the Florida Congressional delegation. Here's Democrat Frederica Wilson.
So today, we are rewriting the history we want to share with our future generations. We are replacing a remnant of hatred and division with a symbol of hope and inspiration, one woman. Because today, we place Mary McLeod Bethune in Statuary Hall in her rightful place among our nation's giants of history. I cannot think of anyone more befitting to occupy this space of grandeur. Congratulations, Speaker Pelosi, Representative Castor, Nancy Loman, Nilda Connors, and to the state of Florida. You made the right choice. One woman.
That's Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, Democrat from Florida, at the statue unveiling today on Capitol Hill. She was referring to the fact that the Bethune statue replaces one of a Confederate general, Edmund Kirby Smith, the change directed by a state law signed by then-Governor Rick Scott, Republican, in 2018. He's now a U.S. Senator. The Smith statue was removed in 2021. Also speaking at today's ceremony, Republican Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida.
In one of the stories, the KKK, after the school was up and running, came marching on the small girls' school with torches, with robes, on horseback. She already had a plan. She told her teachers to disperse, she hid her students, and she stood alone at the gate and stared them down and stood them down. Madam Speaker, in my military career, I've seen some tough cookies, some tough women. I guarantee you this is the toughest one in the hall today. And if that wasn't enough, then she became a member of President Roosevelt's cabinet. She developed a lifelong friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt, who came to stay in Daytona Beach and became a lifelong national leader in one generation, daughter of slaves to a national leader for women and civil rights.
That's Congressman Mike Waltz, Republican from Florida, at today's unveiling. Washington Post includes this. Since 1864, each state has been able to send 2 statues of distinguished citizens to represent it in the U.S. Capitol, constituting the National Statuary Hall collection. And since 2000, states have had the ability to remove and replace existing statues with new ones. A handful of states have done so, but none of those new additions have depicted Black Americans until today. From Yahoo News in the United Kingdom, Prime Minister's questions descended into chaos as 2 raucous MPs were unceremoniously kicked out of the House of Commons. MPs packed the chamber for the first PMQs since Boris Johnson announced he would be resigning as Prime Minister. The opening moments quickly turned into a farce as MPs jeered and baracked the Prime Minister over his veto of a Scottish independence referendum. Struggling to shout over the noise of the chamber, Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle told them to shut up or get out before ordering 2 to be removed after they refused to back down. This is what it sounded like.
I now warn of the honourable members that if they persist in refusing to comply with my order to withdraw, I shall be compelled to name both of them, which may lead to them being suspended from the House. Right, names. To ensure that the honourable member complies. Can it? Where's the names? I order. Shut. Shh. Neil Hanvey, I am now naming you and Kenny McCaskill to leave this chamber. Sergeant, deal with them. Deal with them. Deal with them. Just sit down. Out. No. Sergeant at Arms, escort them out. Take them out, Sergeant. Let them out.
Speaker of the House of Commons Lindsay Hoyle in the British House of Commons Prime Minister's Questions time in London today. When things did settle down, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson took some questions. Opposition leader Keir Starmer of the Labour Party speaking about one of the candidates for replacing Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Starmer saying that that person resigned when Prime Minister Johnson was there and now has a plan, he says, to revive the economy. You're going to hear a response from the Prime Minister. He defends what he sees as accomplishments during his time in office.
Last week, he resigned, accusing the Prime Minister of not conducting government properly, competently, or seriously. He suggested the Prime Minister is not prepared to work hard or take difficult decisions, and implied that the Prime Minister cannot tell the public the truth. Yesterday, he claimed his big plan is to rebuild the economy. Now, even the Prime Minister must be impressed by that Johnsonian brass-neckery. Can the Prime Minister think of any jobs his former Chancellor may have had that means he bears some responsibility for an economy that he now claims is broken?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, I think everybody who's played a part in the last 3 years has done a remarkable job in helping this country through very difficult times. I just want to say to him, really, Mr. Speaker, the next leader of my party may be elected by acclamation, so it's possible this will be our last confrontation over this. It's possible. So I want to thank him. I want to thank him for the style in which he's conducted himself. I think it'd be fair to say he's been considerably less lethal than many other members of this House. And I'll tell you why that is. Because he hasn't come up.
Can I just say to this end of this front bench, I expect better behaviour, and I'm certainly going to get it. Prime Minister.
There's a reason for that, Mr. Speaker. Is over 3 years, in spite of every opportunity, he's never really come up with an idea, a plan, or a vision for this country. And I can tell you that at the end of 3 years, Mr. Speaker, we got Brexit done, which he voted against 48 times. We delivered the first vaccine in the world and rolled it out faster than any other European country, which would never be possible if you listened to him, Mr. Speaker. And we played a decisive role in helping to protect the people of Ukraine from the brutal invasion of Vladimir Putin and helped to save Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud to say that we are continuing, and every one of the 8 candidates will continue with the biggest ever program of infrastructure skills and technology across this country to level up in a way that will benefit the constituents of every member of this House, Mr. Speaker. And it's perfectly true that I leave not at a time of my choosing. And it's absolutely true. But I am proud of the fantastic teamwork that has been involved in all of those projects, both nationally and internationally, Mr. Speaker. And I'm also proud of the leadership that I have given. And I will be leaving, Mr. Speaker, I will be leaving soon with my head held high.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson with the Labour Party leader Keir Starmer in the House of Commons during today's Prime Minister's Questions. The person that Keir Starmer mentioned, the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, Treasury Chief Rishi Sunak, in the first round of voting today, behind closed doors of Conservative Party leaders in Britain, got the most votes, followed by the Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt. But this was only round one. Associated Press reporting that 2 of the 8 candidates failed to reach the 30-vote threshold, and therefore they're out. 6 candidates remaining. If there's no new leader by next week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be back for one more week of Prime Minister's Questions. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more of Washington's top stories sent right to you by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.